Welcome everyone. Let's get right into the stock market charts. Going to use technical analysis to help us be our guide into where the markets are going. Now, I know a lot of people have just talked about the markets going higher. We're seeing a pretty good sell-off today in tech. One thing that I want to premise this video with is we have large cap tech earnings coming out today after the bell, and they're likely going to move the market. Now, so, to see the sell-off here in the triple Qs right before the earnings, I'm not taking, I have a starting short position in triple Qs that I talked about that we shorted right up here at the backtest of this broken trend line. So on Qs, we've got sell signals across the board. We have negative divergence. We've got, the momentum indicators tell us that we're going to get a sell-off. We're seeing selling right before the earnings. We need to wait for the earnings to kind of clear out of the way before we can add to the short. All right. So I've got a starting short position. Going to the hourly chart here, you can see we took the starting short position on the back test of this broken trend line. I have it circled right there. So that's profitable, but just a starting short position. I'm looking to add to it, but I'd like to get those earnings out of the way. I think it's likely they could pop after the earnings and then maybe resume the selling. I don't exactly know, but I do know that I'd like to clear those earnings out of the way to get that earnings risk or headline risk behind us. It is interesting, though, that we're seeing selling right before earnings. So I think, people are taking their profit while they have it and, going to wait for after earnings to figure out where they want to go next. Looking at the SPY, we're starting to sell. You're starting to get that rejection. But again, earnings, we need to see where we go after that. Looking at the hourly chart on the SPY, there's a gap fill right there. 435.58, and we pretty much just about filled that gap. So this is an area where we could bounce. All right, we could have a bounce, and earnings are likely going to dictate where at least the near term move is going to happen. One thing to note, if we look at the FANG stocks, Apple closing basically at support. We have an uptrend line on Apple right here on the hourly. And we also, looking at the daily, have a former high, which is right there at 144.34. We popped above that high, fell back below, popped above it. Today, they're selling it down. Again, all this is just noise. What I'm really looking for is a move outside of this range. So if we break back below this support level, 144.45, then this is going to be a false breakout. And we're going to have, that's a sell signal. So looking for that, if we get that, I think we're likely heading a lot lower, probably down to this 129 area, mark it out right down there as the next level of good support. So that's that. Amazon, very similar chart. We have this kind of range here. This is noise. I'm looking for a break back below 355.55. And if we get that, I think we're likely heading to the bottom of the range, which is all the way down here at 2,934, right in that area. Okay, both Apple and Amazon have negative divergence on the momentum. So this new high that we recently made is a divergent high. See how we made a lower high in momentum than the previous high? So there's your previous high, and you made a much higher high on price, and you're making now a higher high in price but lower high in momentum. I know that can be confusing. The point is, when you make a new high in price, if momentum isn't also making a new high, then it's a divergence. Momentum is diverging or going in the opposite direction as price. And that gives us an indication that we're likely going to see a rejection or a price failure from that breakout. This breakout that occurs here with negative divergence has a higher probability of failing. We've got earnings coming out this week, so we'll wait for those. Google here is, just recently broke above this upward channel. You can see the upward channel on the daily chart with negative divergence. So there is a breakout with negative divergence, has a high probability of failing. We've got earnings after the bell. So if they come out and the earnings are negative, we'll likely open back below this support range, and that would be a false breakout or a bull trap. And that will most likely put us to the bottom of the range over the near term. I think I need to tighten that up a little, but probably down here at around 2431. And Microsoft on the daily chart, you've just been walking up this trend line here. And if I look at the hourly, it really shows clear upward trend. We had a breakout. made a new high. We finally broke down, back tested a little bit, and we're getting rejected. On the daily though, this is a new high, but it's a divergent high. We're making a new high in price, but a lower high in momentum. Earnings coming out after the bell today, so that will likely dictate, what's going to happen. And it's not so much what happens in the after hours. It's really more about what happens tomorrow when the market opens. The after hours is going to be thinly traded. You're not going to have major institutions moving billions of dollars in the after hours. They're likely going to wait for tomorrow for liquidity when the market opens, and then they'll start to move positions around accordingly. So don't you kind of want to disregard what happens in the after hours and look at the price action, what happens when the market opens on Wednesday, as a key indicator of where the market's likely going to head in the near future. As far as I can tell, the market's priced to the downside because of the negative divergences, the breaks, the sell signals that we've had in triple Qs, and everything's really set up to move to the downside, although we might gap up in the after hours or in the pre-market and then start the selling, which will be really more of a trend trade to the downside. So watch for that. So gold, I want to talk about gold real quick. Gold's likely going to move on the Fed news on Wednesday, but we're still holding above this key support of 1790. We've tested it several days. Looking at the hourly, we've basically just been basing out at the support level since the beginning of July, and so far holding. Now, yeah, maybe this is a head and shoulders pattern, but in general, I think the larger pattern looks bullish. We're holding the support. Looks good to me. One thing I also want to point out is the dollar. So here's the dollar futures. Looking at the daily chart, we had this bearish rising wedge recently. Started to wedge higher, but this bearish rising wedge had negative divergence. So you can see the momentum is dropping off on the daily chart, and it's there on the PPO and the RSI, while we continue to spike higher and make higher highs. There's a divergent high, there's a divergent high, and there's another divergent high. These indicate that we're about to reverse trend. And looking at this bearish rising wedge pattern on the hourly chart for these dollar futures, you can see, look at the wedge, how we just continued to wedge higher, higher, higher with that negative divergence. We finally broke, and then we back tested it for a couple days from underneath, and then we've started to really break down. It shows clear on the daily, but you can see we're breaking to the downside of this bearish rising wedge, which is the expected move because it's a bearish pattern. So I'm looking for a move down in the dollar down to about 91.50 for the next level of support. And that should be a tailwind for gold, and gold likely will start to move higher. So I'm seeing signs in some of the miners. They're kind of bouncing off support. Here's Newmont Mining. You can see bouncing off its downtrend line. There's the downtrend line off the daily. We had a breakout. So here's your breakout or buy signal right there. Ran up, came back down for a back test of the trend line, and this is a key area of support right here. Right in here. And you can see we're bouncing off that support today, up 1.5%. We also had bullish divergence on this one. If you look right here, you can see we had bullish divergence building on this. So right there, see how we made a new lower low in price right here, and yet the momentum was higher. So that's bullish divergence indicating that we're likely going to bounce off the support and start trending higher. So this is just one miner that looks bullish to me. This looks like the buy zone right down here. This is why I was adding and building a position in Newmont. I talked about that back during these videos. And so far, so good. The financials, XLF, they look like they're bear flagging, but they've really just gone sideways. We had the original sell signal back here on, really it came on the 8th, June 8th, but we sold down and we've just been flagging out ever since. You can see it's just chopping around. So this is kind of just noise. I do expect us to break to the downside and head down towards the 3163 support area. So keep an eye on that. One thing though to note, the XLF did have bullish divergence right here recently. This was a divergent low right there on the daily chart. So that's important to know. Doesn't mean that we're going to just reverse here. We could put in another divergent low, but it's something to take note of. XLV, I don't talk about this one too often, but we have a clear bearish rising wedge in the XLV chart coming off the March 2020 lows. This has just been creating this big bearish rising wedge. We've been coiling tighter and tighter. recently just rejected off resistance right here. So what I'd want to look for is a break, a definitive daily break or sell signal below the support line of this bearish rising wedge. We have negative divergence that's been building for a little while, telling us we're going to get that break. We just need to see that sell signal. So I'll be on watch for that one. No trigger yet, no reason to short this, and we don't know when it will come. They could pop it to the upside. We could just grind around and then break. But when or if you get that break, that's going to be the next sell signal on XLV. And so I'm going to start to look at some of these healthcare stocks and try to find some individual trade ideas that's within this sector as well. So Tesla reported earnings yesterday, and you can see we're down today 2.5%, kind of starting to break down, but it's not, Tesla's likely not going to move until we get those FANG stocks out of the way. It's going to trade in sympathy with those FANG stocks. So I would just, again, we just need to wait for these mega cap earnings to clear before we can try to figure out where this thing's heading. I do anticipate Tesla to head lower. I'm looking at a move all the way down here. For really my target right now is down here at this 464, 460 area. That's really the target I'm looking, and that's still a move of another 27% to the downside. Still looks good to me to do that. Okay, Snap. So we gapped up on Snap and we're above support. Support's about 73.75. That's the former high right there. And that's where we gapped up to. We're trading around here. Now, if you see a gap down, that's going to create an island cluster top reversal pattern. So a gap down is likely going to be sold pretty impulsively if you gap down and you get a big sell-off. So things to look for. That could come on weak FANG earnings, maybe tomorrow. Just want to point that out in case that shows up in the morning with the gap down. I would look for a gap and crap, basically. A gap and a sell-off. From the gap down, and that will be put in an island cluster top reversal, and we're likely going to move a lot lower from there if we get that reversal pattern. Things to look for. One thing that tells me we have a higher probability of getting a gap down and an island cluster top reversal is the big negative divergence in Snap. This is just a big negative divergence pattern. Each new high has been a divergent high, telling me we're likely going to get some sort of major trend reversal on one of these divergent highs. We just need to see that sell signal or that reversal candlestick. So that's what I'm looking for on that one. Starbucks reports after the bell today. So on this one, we have a clear uptrend coming off the March 2020 lows on this daily chart. We had a breakdown or a sell signal right there. We had a back test 1 and a back test 2. Now they've recovered that trend line right here, but they've done that recovery with negative divergence. So you can see here, if I zoom in on the PPO, still have negative divergence. It's just extending basically today. And then on the RSI, if I can get my cursor right, there's the negative divergence, and it's starting to turn down as well. So, we have negative divergence still remaining on both momentum indicators, a recovery of that, but it's right before earnings. So I think it's likely the earnings are going to be perceived negatively, whether they always try to spin it positive, but it really depends on how the market treats it. So I think we're likely going to sell off after earnings. But that's what the chart tells me. I'm comfortable taking a starter short position on this one pre-earnings, and then I'll add to it if they do sell that thing off. Yep. So I like that one short just because of the chart setup. And then just some of these other stocks, I'm not going to really go through it, but I'll just kind of highlight SEAS still working to the downside. I don't see any reason to get out of this short position. I still see this heading down lower. SCHW still remaining short. We're down near the lows right now. I see a downtrend. I think the downtrend's likely can continue. 6209, next level of support on that one. MGM selling off today, down 3% or so. Again, just continued downtrend. Lower lows, lower highs. All right, so I don't see any reason to get out of that. Looking at 34 as the next level of support. BLK, again, no reason to get out of this. There's your uptrend line on BLK. We broke trend with the sell signal. Nice gap down. Just kind of treading water. I think we're likely going to continue to the downside over time. AEO selling off, again, below trend. So there's your uptrend line right there. Negative divergence at the highs, broke trend, kind of treading water. We need to see more selling, but I think it's likely going to come. ALLY, creating this kind of megaphone pattern, which is that's a indecision pattern basically. So, or potential topping pattern on the short term, but still see this heading lower. So I would look for this to head down to the bottom of the megaphone. But ultimately, I'm still looking for lower prices once we break down to the downside. I don't see any reason why we won't break down. GM, again, just, resolving. We broke trend. There's GM right there. Negative divergence. There's your sell signal. Sell signal, back test, lower lows, lower highs. Working our way lower. I think we're likely going to break, I think we're heading down here to 46.75. So I'm continuing to hold out for that, remaining short on that one. Okay, so just to round it out, we'll wait for those earnings. The posture of the charts right now are set up to bearish. They're set up to sell down. Doesn't mean that they'll sell down right after the earnings report. Maybe you have to give it a day or two. But if you see selling coming in the near future, especially on these FANG stocks, then I would anticipate that we're going to get a correction and that the selling's just getting started. So things to watch for. Let me know what you guys think. Leave me a thumbs up. Check out the course that I put together. Link in the description below. And I will catch you guys on the next video.